Hi everyone, it's Thursday and as promised, here I am live on the Edufolios page on Facebook. This week we're talking about episode 7 of the Reflective Teacher podcast, which if you haven't already listened to, you can of course find on iTunes, Google Play, Spotify and on our website. And this week's episode can be found at edufolios.org/007. Now, this week, we've been talking mostly about professional development and those hours that we need to gather and what we can do with that to make them work harder than perhaps they have been before. Because what if I told you that reflecting on your practice actually counts as professional development learning hours? That every minute or hour that you spend thinking about what went well, what you could do differently, if you wrote that, documented that, would count as professional learning hours. Writing and reflecting on your practice counts as PD in every state and territory in Australia. What if there was a way to take those little thoughts or listening to this podcast or going to a face-to-face session and turn that 15 minutes, that 1 hour, that 6 hours into 15 hours worth of professional development? Well, there is a way, and it's about thinking outside of the box. And that, my friends, is what we were talking about in this week's podcast, which again, you can find at edufolios.org/007. I'm Selena Woodward, and I'm with you here talking about reflective practice because it's something that I'm really passionate about and has been a big part of my teaching career as an English and drama high school teacher. I'm also the co-founder of Edufolios, and in fact, this whole idea of professional development connecting up with accreditation is actually the reason that Edufolios exists in the first place. Did you know that I created it because I was frustrated with the fact that I seemed to be doing two things at once? That reflecting on my professional development hours over here for the registration board seemed to be fulfilling the needs of accreditation over here. And I didn't want to do the same thing twice. So I made a system that let me put the information in once and then sent the data off in whichever format it was required to various bodies, whether that be the department or the TRB. So I feel like this is something that I've spent a lot of time thinking about. And that's why when Hilary sent me a tweet, and Hilary is one of our Edufolios subscribers, and she asked me, how can I go about documenting my PD differently? She said that she struggled with what she should write about, how she should write about it when she went and did any kind of professional learning or training. And I was like, right, let's think about it through some different lenses. So what I'm going to share, what I shared in that podcast were my tips and tricks for making PD work much harder than it's ever worked before for you. And if you've been to one of my face-to-face PDs here in Adelaide, you might have heard me give you some clues about this before. I hope so, and I hope that you've been using some of those tips and tricks. Now, as we talk today, I do have down here on my table my Microsoft Surface. Shout out to the Microsoft team as a Microsoft Innovative Educator Expert, badge. I love my Surface. So I've got that with me and I'll be able to see if anyone pops on live to say hi. Matt will be here shortly to do any moderation that needs to happen in the comments. And of course, whether you're watching live or later, you are more than welcome to join in the conversation. Please feel free to comment any questions or requests that you have, and we will get back to you. We'll keep an eye on those comments for a couple of weeks and make sure that we respond to you as soon as we can. Most importantly, if you have a topic for discussion in the podcast, then we definitely really want to hear from you. So make sure you leave us a comment about that too. Okay, so Matt's here. He'll be moderating. I've got my Surface so I can see. At the moment, there doesn't seem to be anybody. Oh, there's one person here. That's probably Matt just popping in, but that's okay. I will ask questions throughout, and you are welcome to answer, whether that's live or later on. Okay, so let's think about how we feel right now about PD hours and gathering them, about the need to gather them. I know that a lot of TRTs find it really hard because they have to take the day off work often to go and do the PD, and of course they don't get paid for that day, and they're also losing a day's pay. So PD can be frustrating. Also, we need to think about as we've talked before, how do we consider PD and which PD is the best PD for us? Are we just going for the hours, or are we going because the PD starts a whole new conversation? You see, the Northern Territories on their TRB website, on their registration board site, have this great quote, and I mentioned it in the podcast. And that was that they call professional development professional learning because it is not just the knowledge gained in a professional development session that makes the most difference to your professional practice. It's not the knowledge that you gain, but it's what you do with it, how this knowledge is applied. And that is really the way we need to be thinking about all professional learning, because we can recognize that new learning, new professional learning, is often the beginning of something. It should be the beginning of something. And if it isn't, if we can't apply what we've learned and move forward and use it, then either that PD wasn't particularly relevant to us, or we're not giving ourselves the time to do what we know we should do, which is reflect and grow. Okay. Remember those spheres of influence? We've talked about them several times, I think in podcast number 2 and 3. So edufolios.org/003 was the one about focus areas and looking at those spheres. We know that new knowledge is at the graduate level. So if you're turning up for a PD session and you've been teaching like I have for over 20 years, that doesn't mean that the knowledge that you take away is anything other than graduate, unless you apply that, because the graduate's career stage is about you, yourself, and what new knowledge you're gathering. At Proficient, it's about how you're going to use that to create an impact with your students, highly accomplished, the impact on your colleagues, leave the impact on your site, plus all the other things going down. So when you go to PD, if you are entering it into your Edufolio or any other portfolio, be really mindful of what that PD's impact is going to be. And often, to start with, it will be graduate. Now, in the podcast, I gave an example of one of my reflections on PD, and most of the focus areas there were graduate. And if you head to edufolios.org/007 and scroll all the way down to the bottom, you will see that. You'll see that link to my post, and you'll be able to read and have a look at that. And you'll notice that most of them are graduate. I have a couple of proficient in there because during that PD, I was able to connect what I was learning with what I've done in my practice in the past. And that helped me to get over the proficient, because I started talking about applying this and the impact that it had had on my students in the past. But obviously PD is meant to be about the future. And I haven't been able to write a subsequent story about that because I haven't yet had the opportunity to apply that new learning yet in my context. And I'm still waiting for that opportunity. Okay, so I want you to think about how many of you learned something new at a PD and then didn't have the chance to implement it and took the chance to reflect on it. At the very least, we should make time to reflect on it, because these things are the beginnings of new stories of practice. I learn something new, I take it into my classroom, I use it, I evaluate it, and I go round and round and round and round and round in that cycle of reflection. PD should be the start of the journey so you can move it through those career stages. The other thing that amuses me about PD is we often go straight for recording it at standard 6.2, which is engage in professional learning and improve practice. Well, I want to swear by no shit, Sherlock. Of course, it's PD. That's what you're doing. But don't go and spend an hour or a day learning jolly phonics and just come away with 6.2. You need to think deeply, and often we look at the certificate and we see what it says at the bottom and we dutifully copy and paste that in. Now, across different states and territories, the attitude around that changes. In some states, they don't want PD providers to put that on the certificate because they want you to think about what you learned. To get to proficient, you have to be placing this learning in a context. And that means that you will be taking focus areas from all sorts of places as your brain connects your new knowledge with future plans and previous experiences. So bear that in mind. Right now, listening to this podcast over at edufolios.org/007, 007, or even engaging in this conversation, we're 7.4, aren't we? We're engaging with professional networks to broader communities. Okay, we're 7.4. And so even if you listen to the Facebook Live, you could count that as 7.4. You could. But you don't just write about what I said. In order to get these hours to expand, you're going to write about what you learned, what you connected to this, what you're going to do with it in the future. And then you're going to give yourself the opportunity to do the next thing and write about that. So this 15, 20-minute conversation turns into hours and hours and hours of reflection as you apply it, you learn with it, you change the way you're working, and you keep moving forward. That's the trick, okay? Because you're doing way more than just networking right now. Your brain is pinging off in all sorts of places and you're connecting it with all sorts of stories of experience. Don't ever just tick the 6.2 box. You really, not giving yourself the credit that you deserve, all right? Don't just write about your experiences. Write about what you learned. What did you take away from this? Okay, so as I say, there's an example of that at edufolios.org/007. 007, 007. Oh, I should have had a Bond theme. All right, so head to the Bond themed post to get an extract, a little example of that, because it's good to have a look. And it was about adolescent mental health and supporting young people through anxiety, stress, and tough times. And as you know, I work pejoratively over at Flinders University now. So I don't always get the opportunity to put that into place, but I have done in the past in my career as a high school English teacher. When you go to those events, you might be taking photographs. I do at conferences, take photos. You might be tweeting things out as you go. A lot of us do that. You should be doing that with your portfolio of practice too. And in the podcast, I explain how you can do that inside Edufolios, how you can actually take a photo and put it straight into Edufolios using the Edufolios interface, which saves a lot of time. But when you take those photos, if you take a photo and you have asked permission to use those photos, that's evidence of standard 4.5 as well, social and ethical protocols and practices when using ICT. So there's another one you can tick. Okay, so going back to that example, I did do that. I emailed the lady who ran that PD. I got her permission to use the photos. And in fact, she shared my blog on her social media because she thought it was fascinating hearing what I had taken away from her professional development. In as much as she told me a story and then I'd managed to interpret that and take that forward. And she thought that was really cool. So it's always good to network and connect in that way. Okay, so go to edufolios.org/007 and go and listen to that podcast so you can find out how to turn 15 minutes of PD into several hours. And thank you, Hilary, for that fantastic question. Everybody, tell us more. Tell us what you want in these podcasts. Hilary reached out through Twitter. So that's twitter.com/edufolios. Obviously, you found us here in Facebook and you can comment and share with us what you would like to talk about here. All right, tell us what you need and we will do our very best to get you the answers. Next week on the podcast, we have something a little bit different. We have Professor Eddie Blass talking to us about what she's doing with a project called the Inventorium. She's solving an amazing problem. And actually, it's an astounding problem. Because the fact that and I'm mincing my words here because I'm a bit startled by this fact, but in 2017, the facts and figures have just been released by the government. 48%, that's nearly half of children left our schools with no qualifications. What? So Eddie is talking to us about that and talking to us about personal and social development and what she's doing with curriculum, etc., to try and meet the needs of the students who are disengaged and disenfranchised and we're losing them. She's trying to pull them back and give them a real sense of purpose. It's a really powerful podcast and that will come out on Wednesday. That will be episode 8 and then Eddie will join me here on the Thursday on Facebook Live to answer any questions that you have and we'll just have a conversation again about what she's up to with the Inventorium. Don't miss it. It's definitely a really good one to listen to. And I can't wait to see you there. So thank you for tuning in and having a check out of this video. Have a great Harmony Day or International Happiness Day, depending where you are in the world. And I'll see you again this time next week. Take care.